Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author, and National Geographic explorer, Ian Urbina, with National Geographic's Chief Storytelling Officer, Kaitlin Yarnall.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Kaitlin.
You ready?
We'll see.
So I just want to do a show of hands, and I know it's dark in here. Who's had the privilege of reading Ian's book or a chunk of his book? We've got a couple hands out there. I should say yet. You all will after this talk. But I think
quiz.
we were lucky enough to have you read this morning and then to see that video. I want to start with, where are you from, Ian?
I'm from here. I grew up in D.C. Then I lived abroad in Cuba and Mexico for a little while, and then Chicago, and then ended up back here.
Yeah. So you didn't grow up on the ocean?
No. Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I went to the beach growing up, but I never was on sailboats or spent any time at sea.
Do you know how to swim?
I do.
Good.
Yeah.
So why the ocean? Was this a long-time fascination or something recent?
So I mean, as a boy, I always, when I would look at the map of the world, I would always find myself looking at the blue, and especially the specks of land in the middle of the blue. So I always had this sort of, romantic curiosity about what's life like out there and who crosses that space, and so that was always there. And then I got really interested in it. I went to grad school for anthropology and ran away, procrastinating on my dissertation, and took a job on a ship for a while. And the ship never left port, and so I was stuck in Singapore at a dock for a long time, and I found myself in the company of the diaspora transient tribe of people called Seafarers, and I found them fascinating, just the stories they had and the sort of culture that they lived in. And so when I left there, I thought, I got to write something about them and that space that they operate in.
Did you know you were a journalist then, or were you still a grad student?
I was metamorphosing. I kind of knew I liked writing, and I kind of always wanted to be Jane Goodall. I wanted to go out and see amazing things. And I thought anthropology would do that, which it could have, but journalism drew me because it seemed more to fit my type A caffeinated, inclinations. So, so I always wanted to write and wanted to travel.
Did you finish that PhD?
I did not.
Yeah. It's all right. You've done well.
Yeah.
You're going to be fine. In the book, one of the themes that jumped out to me the most, and you explicitly call it out, is this tragedy of the commons. That the oceans belong to everyone, yet they belong to no one. Right? And for those who haven't read, I'm wondering if you could just give a couple examples of how that plays out through the book.
So before examples, I would just riff a little bit on the kind of the way I viewed the high seas especially, or the offshore realm generally, was as this frontier, kind of this generally lawless place that happens to cover 2/3 of the planet, and where there are more than 56 million people working out there, from whom you rarely hear much. Anthropologically, I kind of wanted to go into that space and chronicle their lives, their work, and the abuses that occur to the environment, to them. The sort of tragedy of the commons is a useful way to think about what's going on out there, in the sense that in every realm, both from intentional dumping, to extraction of mineral resources, to human rights abuses, murder, etc. So much of what happens is sort of allowed to occur with impunity because there really isn't any government that takes ownership of who should prosecute, investigate, etc. So almost every topic in the book has as its core theme, that a lack of enforcement often it's very clear that what happened. I mean, you saw footage of a murder caught on camera. It's hard to argue that that's self-defense. You can tell from that. But the real crime is that to this day, even though we put that on the front page of the New York Times, no government has been willing to investigate. And we have, the pictures, the guys at the end of that scene, posed for selfies after they filmed it, and so anyway, the tragedy of the commons is that crimes occur with impunity out there.
Do you think there's anywhere else like that on the planet?
I mean, there are, as you well know, other commons. I mean, to some degree, I think the air around us is a common that for a long while has been viewed as a bottomless trash can where we could dump endless amounts of carbon for free. And now we're realizing, wait, that's actually a commons that we should do something about because it's going to fry us. So I think the atmosphere is certainly another commons. It's different. There aren't people operating as much, but it is a shared space that we now realize if we abuse to a certain degree, it's going to catch up with us. Obviously, the other commons often reference are the poles, and outer space. But I don't think there's any other realm on the planet that has this many people working out there and for which the economy, the global economy, is so dependent. 90% of what we consume comes by way of the high seas, and we all benefit from the lawless nature of that space because things can traverse it really efficiently without governments meddling. But at the same time, bad things happen out there as a result.
Yeah. What's another theme that came through to you in the book that you just, discovered, either set out to write about or that pulled through?
I mean, there were surprising, so as you know, the first 2 years of reporting occurred with the paper and then took 2 more years. And I intended to write a compilation of stories that established the diversity of crime. Most people thought of Somali piracy and the BP spill, when you would mention maritime crime, and I was like, oh, there's a huge amount of other things happening out there. Some, not all of it bad, but much of it extra legal. And so as I spent the time reporting, I found myself really taken with the psychological impacts of spending years on end in this space, and kind of what it does to people's psyche to be living in a place that sort of operates by its own laws of physics, and time is very different out there, and the relationships between people in that spaceship that you're in, called the ship, the vessel, are different. And so one of the themes was just sort of the power of silence and the power of isolation and sort of the alternate form of solitary confinement that kind of lifestyle represents.
Were you there long enough for it to affect you?
Probably ask my family. They'll give you a more honest answer. But yeah, I think so. I mean, not as long as these guys, and it is mostly male world. They do tours of 15, 20, 24 months on end. I definitely felt, the effect. You even small things like if you are at sea, there's something called land sickness, right? And people get seasick and some people don't. I don't, but I get severely land sick, which is when I get back from sea, my pendulum can't readjust, and so I'll have what feels like bed spins even when I'm just sitting here. And sometimes it'll take weeks to get that to stop, and you get sick, you vomit, and just the whole notion that it can affect you that much, even in your very biology. Spending that long in small spaces with a lot of silence, and made it tough for me when I got back. Just dealing with the pace of modern landlubber life, family responsibilities, devices. Just felt really overwhelming. So those things affect you.
So one of the things I loved about the book is. And for those who haven't read it, the book is a series of essays that each touch on a theme of the Outlaw Ocean. But I loved the characters in the book. I fell in love with several of them. I want to hear more about one of them. This is just selfish. Rebecca Gompertz, she's from Women on Waves, right? Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about Rebecca and what she does?
Yeah, I mean, she's a great character in the sense that she's a woman in a very male world. a character who's doing things that, regardless of your stance on abortion, you can see that she's pursuing what she views as the right thing to do and helping people. A lot of actors out there doing purely nefarious things. And so she's a Dutch doctor, formerly of Greenpeace, who saw a need around the world to help young women, often usually young women and girls, who are in dire need of abortions in places where abortions are illegal and often quite dangerous. And so Women on Waves and Rebecca take a ship around to these countries, enter their national waters, often quietly enter port, and then plug into this sort of underground network of healthcare providers, OBG doctors, to find clients. And then they take these women and girls offshore out to international waters. And the minute you cross the line from national and international waters, the law on the vessel becomes that of the flag you fly. Her ship is an Austrian flag. Abortion's legal there. So in some ways, what I liked about her story as part of the Outlaw Ocean was just, it was yet another example of the interesting, complicated way that the sea interacts with on-land law, and how some players have found clever ways to game it so as to do what they want to do. And in her case, it's provide this vital service.
You've got a Repo Man I liked a lot too.
Max Hardberger, whose name you can't, have thought up even better. So Max Hardberger is this he's like something out of a Mark Twain novel. He's a guy originally from Alabama, and he is a professional maritime repo man, and he steals ships essentially on behalf of banks and mortgage lenders.
And these are big actors, like banks we know.
Oh yeah. Who else is buying ships? These are deep pockets and big players, names you know well, and a couple of different scenarios where I know about 6 of these guys. They're all guys, and they're extraction experts, and they are usually called when there's a ship that either has defaulted on its loan, in a typical repo kind of way, or more often when a ship has entered a port and some scam seems to be at hand, and local officials are in cahoots locking down the ship, possibly to take ownership and sell it. And so the owners or whomever, the interested parties, will hire these guys to go in with a team. And usually, in Max's case, is to start by trying to talk the other parties down, and say, okay, well, this is a $2 million ship and a $6 million fine for having bumped into the port. Seems a little out of whack. And then if that doesn't work, then they steal it. And they sneak on board, and they make what's called a run to the 13. The national to international waterline is, by some definitions, 12 miles. So if they can get to high seas, international waters, 13 miles, then the jurisdiction and legal issues shift. And so if Max and his crew can get the ship out into high seas, and usually they try to bring it to another port where the law is more favorable to the money lenders, and oftentimes these dramatic chases ensue. And so I embedded with him on 2 repos, one in Haiti and one in Greece. And yeah, he's just this colorful character.
Are you still in touch with either one of them?
Yeah, everyone in the book I still talk to, and I'm doing a whole new round of reporting, so I still have I'm constantly scheming the next adventures. Yeah.
Have they read the book?
I don't ever ask that. If they don't say it on their own, there might be a reason that perhaps I don't want to hear,
Yeah.
But Max has read the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. At the end of every chapter I read, I didn't want to move on, right? Like I wanted to stay with that story, whether it was with the Sea Shepherd guys or Rebecca or Max or so many other characters with the Somali pirates. How did you move on? How did you decide that's enough of that story, I got to go on to the next chapter?
I didn't. I mean, that is a really smart, intuitive question, and it is a real challenge. And in one chapter in particular, the Somali chapter, which is 15 pages too long, at the beginning of that 15 too long pages, I say, like, this is where the story should have ended. But, I couldn't put it down. And so, kind of like showing the reader the exit. If you want to leave, now's your moment. But I'm going to keep going here.
How'd that go with your editor?
I thought the editors of the book, so the Somali reporting was not at the Times, it was, and I thought Knopf, the publisher, would cut the chapter, honestly, or cut it in half, and they didn't. I still don't quite understand why, but I think like when you're dealing with, the reason that is a perfect example of the question you're asking is that in the Somali case, we stumbled, Fabio, my photographer, and I stumbled in Somalia on this horrific case of human slavery on these ships that were in Somali waters, and these were, upwards of 120 Cambodian trafficked workers who had no idea that they were going to end up there, and no one knew, they were invisible to the world, and we had snuck a phone in onto the ship, and we were plugged into the authorities and Interpol, and so we had become a part of the story in that we were the sole source of communication with these guys, and so it no longer felt like journalism, it felt like, I don't know, life and death situation. So I couldn't really put it down. And then as it unfolded, it just felt like this needs to be chronicled, the fact that people end up in this situation. So, but yeah, that is a constant trouble with all the stories of how do you break up with that significant other, gently and politely.
Yeah. It's a big question. What's the policy government response been to the book? Anything changed that you wanted to see changed? Did you have specific goals in mind when you wrote these articles, essays, book?
I mean, the beauty and the flaw of the book is it's really broad, and it attempted to sort of broaden the spectrum of understanding of what happens out there, almost like here's a taxonomy of misbehavior out there, or extra legal behavior. Rebecca's not misbehavior, but so it's always hard to figure out how to answer that question because there were outcomes in each silo, whether it's sea slavery and the problem of sea slavery. There was a lot of that reporting occurred at the New York Times when Secretary of State John Kerry was in office, and he took a personal interest in the reporting and got super involved, and a lot happened surrounding it, including, on the increment, on the very small level, and there was a main character who was a man named Lang Long who was shackled by the neck and sold ship to ship, and he was a central character in one of the stories, and that guy, Lang Long, was rescued, and he was put in a facility, and the government opened an investigation and found the culprits, and they prosecuted them, and all these things came, which was great. And then on the policy level, adjusting laws, for example, that were meant to address concerns about seafood supply chain, but that really only looked at fishing issues and not at fishers, not at the people. And so to some degree, and again, credit to the others who also were reporting and doing amazing stuff on this as well at the same time, that had a big impact on how they remodeled those laws. So I think there've been a lot of repercussions, and just a general, I think to some degree, fluency in what happens out there, and sort of a public awareness about, post 9/11, how stowaways are treated differently and how that's a real concern, or the fact that more oil gets dumped intentionally into the ocean than the BP spill and the Exxon Valdez spill combined every 3 years. These sorts of things I don't think were known before, and now people are talking about it more.
Good. So I want to ask a personal question. The events that you witnessed and that you report on, they're pretty bleak from the human and the ecological side. And I'm sure many in this room are familiar with this feeling. How did you keep going? You did this for how many years?
6 now.
6 years. Did you want to quit?
Yes, especially after and during certain reporting trips. I think Somalia and the sea slavery reporting in Thailand and South China Sea, probably the most difficult ones, emotionally, physically, and especially the sea slavery reporting, it was extremely hard to get to these vessels. So it just took weeks upon weeks of waiting and negotiating and schmoozing and failed attempts to get out into the space and to find the right vessels where we could chronicle it. And so that is really exhausting. I learned a lot. I think photographers, and many are in the room, as a writer, I've learned more from photographers about being a good traveler than anyone else. I think they're the best in the world, and Nat Geo.
Why?
I think as different writers can bullshit. They can be a bit further back. Photographers can't fake it. They have to be right there, and so they really need to know how to. I don't know if I should celebrate that applause.
You've just made a bunch of friends.
Yeah,
a lot of friends.
At my own expense, perhaps. But no, I think they have to know how to be invisible, know how to get really up close. They have to know how to do a lot of things to a degree that writers often don't have to or don't know how to. And so just learning how the good ones do that. And also they travel a lot more and faster, and they also carry a gear, and where I have a pen and a paper and so it's just like learning how they do all that is really helpful for me. I learned massive amounts from Fabio and other photographers. And also just sort of the self-upkeep. You're not just keeping that lens because it's your only one, but you're also like making sure you don't get mono or get an infection. When you're on ships, you're going to be on a ship for a while. You can't afford to get super sick. And on the one hand, you want to be eating what they eat, whoever the they is. But on the other hand, you got to be really careful, because if you get sick and you're out for 5 weeks on a vessel, that's a big problem.
So what'd you do to stay healthy?
I stopped biting my nails. I stopped using contact lenses. I learned how to fake eat. Like I'm eating, but I'm not actually eating. I'm moving the food around. I brought little things that I could eat that would keep me. I lost a lot of weight. My weight fluctuated hugely on these ships, but so I just got better at knowing my kit, and I also just tried to check in with myself regularly on how am I doing, in my own head, because you're pulling long 40-hour days and stuff like that. And I'm super prone to rituals, and I leaned into that, knowing that I need that for my own mental health. So I tried to carve out a certain time every day to write, to just get away from conversation, to work out, that kind of thing.
So hopeful to hopeless scale, where are you now?
I'm kind of
I know your natural inclination.
Hopeful. I guess. I don't know. I think I'm hopeful and hopeless in some ways. Like, I'm hopeful that journalism, I'm optimistic that journalism can make a difference. Like, this reporting has really inspired me. The people I work with, the people I've worked with, people I've met along the way. I'm really inspired. A lot of it's really dark, but along the way I met a lot of amazing people who, even Langlong, people whose ability to survive is really incredible. And, you're in the midst of a bunch of, 40 Cambodian deckhands, all of whom are essentially sea slaves. Either they've been kidnapped or they've been debt bonded onto that ship. And, their stories are deeply tragic. They're singing, they're joking, there's bravado, there's play. These sorts of things are really inspiring in really dark places. So I find that hopeful. The big questions are really bleak, climate change and human suffering questions. I'm pretty pessimistic about that stuff, but you don't have any other choice but to keep fighting them.
Yeah. So you left the Times in the middle of this reporting after how many years on staff?
17.
17. So it's a big change.
Yeah.
What are you up to? Besides getting grants from National Geographic.
Exactly. I'm trying to bilk National Geographic to fund me. So I stepped away. I created a nonprofit called the Outlaw Ocean. I could have come up with a more creative name, I suppose. It essentially was just a way to do another round of reporting. I wanted to stay on this for another 5 years. And, so I'm just pursuing more stories, but some maybe for the Times, but a lot for other venues to get it out more broadly. And doing some funky things with music, Is it worth going into that?
Yeah.
I guess I have to now that
You said it.
2 minutes remaining. Okay.
Yeah.
5 years of footage is a repository of video with a lot of amazing sound. Machine gun fire in Somalia and chanting deckhands on the South China Sea and spinning winches and captains yelling at each other. So just really rich sound. So I thought, like, wouldn't it be cool to make an archive of sounds and then go to musicians of all different sorts around the world and give them the book and say, make music based on these stories, the emotions, and using, to whatever degree you want, these sounds. And I thought it would be a couple artists, and it's turned into this huge project. It's really inspiring, and so I'm doing that as well as reporting news stories.
Where can we listen to the music?
It's the first batch of albums come out in 2 weeks, and it'll be everywhere. Warner Music Group is distributing them, maybe Spotify and everywhere. You'll find it. Yeah.
So are you stuck on the ocean forever now, you think?
I don't know.
Or is this another big...
Forever is a big term. I think 5 years is what I committed to doing. It's such a journalistically virgin space. There's very few reporters out there, and the stories are amazing, many of which I didn't get to. So yeah, I think easily 5 years, and we'll see at that point.
Great. Well, thank you, Ian. I hope everyone now really wants to read this book.